Welcome to Teaching Artist Podcast, a show dedicated to discussions of teaching art to kids, making art, and how those things overlap and feed each other. I'm Rebecca Potzaguirre, your host, an artist and educator. Lionel Cruet spoke about his teaching practice as well as his exhibit, Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future, which is in its third iteration at Play and Inspire Gallery, which I run with Maria Coit. He talked about the process of developing the exhibition in all three iterations, from private viewing at Ye Gallery in New York, to exhibit at El Lobi in Puerto Rico, to online at Play and Inspire. The title was chosen carefully to encompass the writing that accompanies the exhibition while also exploring the visual arts as a mode of persuasion, a mode of rhetoric. We talked about how apt the idea of uncertain futures feels at this moment. I loved hearing about how Lionel's process begins with drawing and watercolor and then expands into digital media, video, and transmedia storytelling. He talked about collaboration and how he works with fellow artists, curators, sound designers, and animators to bring his ideas to life. Go check out the show at playinspiregallery.com. We have also included some discussion prompts to share with students, and we'd love to hear your feedback if you do share those with your class. Lionel Cruet was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, lives and works in New York City and San Juan. Cruet received a Bachelor in Fine Arts from La Escuela de Artes Plásticas in Puerto Rico and a Master in Fine Arts from CUNY, the City College of New York, and a Master's in Education from the College of St. Rose. He was the recipient of the Juan Downey Audiovisual Award in 2013 at the 11th Media Arts Biennale at the National Museum of Fine Arts in Santiago, Chile, and in 2018 was a fellow at the Socrates Sculpture Park in New York City, and a fellow from the Laundromat Project, an organization that focuses on the arts and social engagement in New York City. Cruet uses multiple media, including experimental digital printing processes, performance, and audiovisual installations to confront issues that concern ecology, geopolitics, technology, and colonialism. Cruet's artworks have been included in exhibitions at the Bronx Museum of the Arts in 2017, Centro de Arte Contemporáneo de Quito, Ecuador in 2021, Everson Museum of Art in Syracuse, 2017, Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in Puerto Rico in 2013, and Feria de Arte Sonoro at Universidad de Sagrado Corazón, Puerto Rico in 2014, and a solo exhibition at the Bronx River Art Center in 2015, which I actually managed education programs from 2010 to 2012 at the Bronx River Art Center. His work has also been reviewed in Made in Mind magazine, Design Boom, Terremoto MX, Daily Serving California College of the Arts, and Latinx Spaces. Cruet works with the New York City Department of Education as well as multiple nonprofits that promote art and aesthetic education for immigrant youth. In 2020, he co-founded an independent pilot art program in Puerto Rico, Banasta, Residencia Artística, that offers an artist residency and sessions of art criticism to develop the artist production. Let's hear from Lionel. I am talking today with Lionel Cruet, who I'm excited to hear from and hear about your teaching career, your art career, where and how and if they kind of intersect. But we also have an exciting exhibit up that we're going to talk about. So I always like to start with just sort of your journey. How did you become an artist and an educator?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening. Thank you, Rebecca, for the invitation. And I'm very excited to be sharing with you guys today and sharing with you some thoughts and some anecdotes and kind of like my background and how I arrived into into what I'm doing currently, and also more about how I arrive into this online exhibition that we're doing, Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future.
Yes.
And to answer your question, I feel that my practice as an artist and as an educator has happened simultaneously. I have an interest on this aspect of participation through my work of art, and I am a true believer that the creative process of an artist depends so much on social relations and, and the perspective of that viewer, right? And that interaction that happens. And then there's a reciprocity between that audience that perceives the work of art and that understand it at different levels. So I feel that a very important part is understanding how those messages are coming across through the artwork and being sensitive to that audience. And that's how I kind of connected, or that's how I see this bridge between art and in my practice as an educator. That is when those moments connect. So my background as an artist, I've also developed through my education. I have felt that the wonderful opportunities has happened to me come exactly from connections that I have had through my academic journey. And why not to continue within that environment? I'm an artist that have greatly developed, right, intellectually, and even in the way that like the craft process, even the research process have it's in direct relation with educational practice and academic practices. So that is also like another point where it connects. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I love hearing those ideas about like the creation process, but then also the way that your work is viewed and the way people experiencing it. Like that connects to teaching. I love that.
Yes, at some moments some of those things are more explicit than others, and meaning that some of the strategies that I use in my teaching practice or in my practice as an educator, or even doing research, like sometimes are more explicit in some of the artworks than in others, and others is more like interpretive. And I feel that my audience too changes. It depends on the places where the artworks are presented, or the installations, or the dynamics of the institutions that are presenting it, that are more open to some sort of an openness from that audience to explore their understanding of the artworks. And in other places it's just more intuitive, and they just happen to like absorb some of the things that I can later seeing in other iterations. But I think it depends very much on the location, on the moment. And I can think about something very clear, right? Like before, like I will say in 2019, during the summer of 2019, I had an exhibition, a group exhibition that I was participating as part of a residency project in Germany, in Berlin, with Kultusschaffer. In that exhibition, we were a month working with another artist during a month to be able to develop this exhibition, and it was a very well attended exhibition, and the audience was very receptive of the artworks that were exhibited there, because it was an immersive installation. Like people had to literally get in and experience the sensorial space that we created, and the responses from the audience were very, very clear. They got to talk to us face to face with the artwork and kind of like develop their thought process of what they were observing. It was very immediate rewards, and kind of like we got a sense of what the audience was experiencing. And I feel that in the most recent years, and I can think about last year when I was at the Center of Contemporary Art in Ecuador, the exhibition that happened there was a process also of a long research and residency project that I was doing there earlier 2021. And it was interesting that my reception of what the audience got from the piece that I exhibited there, which was also an exhibition and a part of a group show, was through social media and through the means and the structures of social distancing. So I couldn't be able to interact with the people, yet social media came to support how the audience were perceiving the exhibition, and how the audience actually participated in the exhibition, especially in the installation. So yeah, there's 2 points in there that are completely different, but yet participatory, yet open to hear how people were receptive about the show.
Yeah. Do you feel like that has changed the way you're making work and the way you're conceiving of the end result of the presentation of your work? This shift that, I feel like now we're in this sort of unknown time where things are coming back in person, and then no, wait, we're going back online. Nope, maybe we're back in person. Like there's this sort of, we don't know what it's going to be. but that shift from being in person and the immersive experience that can happen there versus a different, maybe also kind of immersive experience that can happen online. How has that shifted the work?
Thank you that you're mentioning that, because that actually connects to the exhibition that we're currently doing, Rhetorics of an Uncertain
Yes.
Future, that is precisely the kind of like the third iteration or the closing of that chapter of three different modalities that we present in the exhibition. So we started with a private viewing with my gallery here in New York at G Gallery, and that happened in late September. And we had this sort of one-to-one experience, and you could actually book a visit to be able to see the exhibition just by itself, and was the opening chapter of what I call Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future, where audiences were only seeing this large screen in the middle of the gallery with like in this deep red environment, and the animation on this TV was this wounded sea turtle that was actually kind of like in their doing the slight movements of death in a way. And there was also an accompanying piece that was on a screen that was hanging from the corner left side of a pelican. There was a headless pelican of an animation that was constantly flying in the opposite direction. I feel that this part of sort of intimate viewing, because people had to actually make a reservation to go into the gallery and see it, presented this sort of solitary experience that the audience was doing with that. And it happened on a really great time, because New York City still sort of in this wave of recovering or yet not recovering from COVID situation, and social distancing is a real thing. So booking just a visit, just an individual visit to this space was an opportunity to make the exhibition accessible to an audience in a different modality, and that I have never done before. The second iteration of the exhibition happened in October in San Juan, Puerto Rico, at a Lobi, with the support of this nonprofit organization that is an artist-run space, and it was curated by Diane Bras Feliciano. And this exhibition also was part of, it is the second part of Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future. And in this instance, it was just an entire immersive space. It was open during very specific times during the week, especially on weekends. And it was also with this modality that you could be able to book an individual visit if you wanted, like just do a reservation. I mean, I have never done that, and kind of like troubleshooting with a Lobi and with Vanessa and Melissa, who actually, they have done a miraculous job of maintaining the track of how the exhibition was perceived. I mean, it was a very innovative experience, because I have never had to be able to know in advance, like, who is the audience that is going to see the exhibition and at what times, and how they perceive the show, like on those particular moments. And now with Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future with Play and Inspire, the exhibition is online. So it's an immersive exhibition, but it's online, and people can have that immersive experience either through their mobile phones or even in their computers, and have an extended perspective of that landscape, as I call it, of that perspective of that landscape in this virtual space. And it's providing a different experience, an experience that you don't need necessarily to do an RSVP. You don't need a key to be able to enter the space, or you don't need that facilitation, but yet you can always go into the exhibition and see the space at any time during the duration of the exhibition. So I feel that the work has not changed in terms of the concept and in terms of the visual representation, but it has morphed, I think, in the ways that are presented in the planning of how the audiences interact with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also am interested in how the curation between those three spaces maybe has shifted slightly. Like, I know when Maria Coit, who helps me run Play and Inspire Gallery, when we first saw your images, you had sent images of, I think, people looking at some of those creatures that you had designed, but they were in sort of an immersive light space. And you could see that it was sort of a gallery space where the light was, this colored light was important and was a big part of it. But then there's also these sort of images, and then playing off each other sparked this idea of like, well, we could do that in a website. We could have this sort of idea of an immersive light space on the screen with these images becoming things that are just floating in that screen somehow. It was interesting working through that with you and with the other curators that have been involved in the project in Rhetorics for an Uncertain Future, and then sort of your whole team pulling it together has just been really interesting. I'm wondering what that experience has been like for you.
Absolutely. So one of the interesting things is that this entire project of Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future started or sort of developed from the research investigation that I was doing in Quito, in Ecuador, late 2020, early 2021. As my project that I was doing there and the research that I was focusing was about the sort of coastal spaces, these liminal spaces, tropical and subtropical environments, and how the mangroves become this sort of important but invisible subject of this entire space that yet is an extremely efficient and a very important ecosystem, but it's also in a prompt disappearing. It is disappearing in the world due to many different factors that are related to climate change, to human activity, to different zoning, expansion of habitable spaces, and so on. And the proposal that I was developing at the Center of Contemporary Art in Quito was precisely that, how this silent subject of this environment becomes so essential and so important, not only for our life and for our present and for our future. So the images that I created from there was this entire orange tarp that was titled Without Horizon or Sin Horizonte. And it's this black sort of image of the shadows of a mangrove that is yet a landscape, but there's no horizon, there's no point where it starts, where it ends, and there's this sort of skewed perspective that I was very interested to develop in there, sort of as a point of reflection about like how we are perceiving these spaces and perhaps like the absence of it. What sort of uncertain future are we moving towards, right? Because this species of mangrove not only help them protect coastal spaces and coastal ecosystems in tropical and subtropical places, but are essential for many other things that happen around the world. And from there, I started diving more in deep into research about biology and recent investigations that has happened. And also, because it's precisely an ecosystem that is beautifully connected, there's a lot of other species and life forms that like become an essential part of it. And from there is where those images are coming from, of the wounded sea turtle, the sea crab that is just by itself, or perhaps some of this mangroves that seem like unfinished that we're going to see in this website, and the Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future online with Play Inspire, are precisely those shadows of those other life forms that are essential to the mangrove, yet online we see them scatter and sort of floating in this sort of light transition or vertical landscape, but they don't have a place to be. There's no mangrove for them to hide or to actually, because it doesn't exist. So it's the closing chapter of that sort of slow process of disappearance of this ecosystem. Yes.
Yeah, it's so poetic and beautiful and heartbreaking. And it also feels, I know the focus is thinking about climate change and the current climate catastrophe that we're, experiencing, but it also, the title and even just like I'm going to say poetic again, just how the images and the light and the color all kind of come together fits into all the other things that we're experiencing right now. This, like I think I mentioned earlier, this sort of unknown with the pandemic, this idea of an uncertain future feels just very apt right now in so many ways.
Yeah, and the title of the exhibition was something that we thought out, and I thought out through the process of creation, because perhaps for a person might not be something explicit or direct with this ecological concern or something that extend into the narrative of climate change, because when we think about rhetorics, is the art of persuasion, and it's something that we use in the academic environment, and we use as a way to be able to persuade, to be able to talk about logic, to talk about grammar, to talk about how we actually present a clear discourse about something. And that is something that in the academic environment we try students and people to be able to engage with, so they can have a very clear perspective about what they're presenting. So with with this exhibition, one of the discussions that I had with Diane as we were developing the concept of this entire show was about what is that moment of persuasion and how we can bring this art of persuading, but extending it from right from writing, from research, that it was the paper that she presented, but also through the extension of art, and how can these ideas of persuasion be presented through the modes of the visual arts. And just always thinking about this sort of unknown future. And the future is something that we cannot predict, and that is certainly something that is unknown, but it's specifically about the subject is even more obscure, because we just don't know what is going to be in the next like 10 years, in the next 35 years. We have some sort of a horizon of how this is going to look like, and just by pure inferences and research that has happened, but it's unclear. And then if we like, I think the purpose of the exhibition for me as an artist is presenting these images that are slightly poetic, as you said, but also symbolic of something that can make us think about what is going to happen next, or how this space is going to happen, and presenting chapters and moments where the audience can have an access to it. I also think about my audience in a wider range, and that is something that we experience in all the iterations of the exhibition, is that the Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future is accessible to a younger audience, to a more adult and more focused into the art audience, but someone that doesn't necessarily know about art can also understand what is being presented in here. One of the beautiful anecdotes that I have from the moment that we exhibited at a Lobi in Puerto Rico was that I was visited by one of the grassroots organization that protects one of the most biodiverse areas in the northeast of Puerto Rico, and they are very active about how this space needs to be protected because of the high activity of sea turtles that come every year, to be able to use these beaches and this entire area as a nesting place. And they came to the exhibition, they're like, wow, you're presenting a perspective that is something that we actually are protecting and that we're promoting, and that is our mission. But I think the moments that we can join forces through the arts, through education, through this grassroots organization, we can build on a stronger voice. And that was something that I presented to them. I'm like, we are talking the same language, it's just from different perspectives.
Yeah, I love that connection. And the idea, like you talk about persuasion, and I feel like what you're doing is sort of storytelling, which is a way of persuasion. People are clicking through and looking at the, first they're presented with these images of, as you put it, sort of shadows of these creatures. And then if they kind of explore a little bit and click through, they start to see this story being told by these images and by these creatures, about these creatures, and like what do these, this pelican and this sea turtle, what do they have to tell us about our world? It's really beautiful.
And those images are precisely drawings. Like, they all came out from like watercolors or real drawings on paper. I know that most people have an understanding about my work that is very extended into this audiovisual media and video and sound and everything. But at the core of it, there's also like a very traditional practice of just sitting down and sketching and brainstorming and drawing. And I use watercolor because it's a fast process to be able to create imagery and create images, and this transparency that it creates is sort of make a connection with the way that I work with lights and spaces. So that's why I use that medium. But all of the images that you guys are going to see in this online version of Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future, and even in the previous iterations of this exhibition, are actually coming from a drawing, from a real drawing and real watercolor. And when you talk about storytelling, it's important too that I'm not using, or even the curator and I, like as we were developing this project, we're not using the term of transmedia storytelling or transmedia project as a way to justify the project, but it's actually something that is precisely happening. A transmedia storytelling is the practice of designing and even sharing ideas and participating with an audience through one narrative that it extends into different formats and to different media. So you can see the exhibition through different postings that is happening in social media platforms such as Facebook or even Instagram, and to an extension of TikTok. But also you can go to to the exhibition into the physical space and see it. Now with Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future for Play Inspire, you can see it in an online website. So it's a show that, or it's an exhibition that have multiple components that can be accessed through different modalities and through different media. And that is my interest at the end of the day, that all of these sort of drawings or creatures that are being presented in here have their own life form and can be projected into different environments.
I think that's beautiful, and so I feel like helpful and interesting for artists to hear that it does begin with like this drawing practice and watercolor, and you see the end result and you maybe think that this guy's just on the computer all the time or it's completely digital or it's something else, but it's great to hear that there's that sort of basis of like a drawing practice. And I know there's also an aspect of collaboration, and I know you've touched on it quite a bit with collaboration with the curators, but then there's also collaboration with like sound people, musicians, even like maybe graphic designers or graphic people that are more experienced there. There's like all these different collaborations, and then even going kind of back in time, the work you were talking about in Berlin sounded like there was a big aspect of collaboration there as well. I'm curious, I guess, if you could talk about collaboration in your work in general, but maybe also with this exhibition.
Yes, totally. Collaboration is a very important part because I feel that along my career as an artist and as an educator, I have come across with so many creative people that are experts into different areas and whom I actually trust and respect their work very much. And why not to be able to like join forces or to be able to build a bigger discourse or a bigger perspective into something, introducing sort of like their talent in this process. So for Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future for Play Inspire, as well as Lobi and as well as G Gallery, it's a team of people that I have been able to bring together. So the images that you see on the website that are sort of animated, these animated drawings, were precisely made in collaboration with 3 different animators. One of them is Daniel Capote. He took part of the animation of the pelican, of the headless pelican from a drawing that I was making. Hector Cruet, who was actually my brother, he was animating some of the birds that you're going to see also in the online version. And the sea turtle was animated by Kelly. She's a professor at Moore in Pennsylvania, and I have known by reference her work. And she was very focused to bring this drawing of this sea turtle and transform it into a puppet that can be able to, to sort of do the slight and subtle movements as a sea turtle will look like in those instances. So I know that they specialize on making characters or sort of transforming still images into moving images. And I was extremely moved by their talent and by the way that they work. The sound compositions that you're going to see, or the soundscapes, as I call them, are created by multiple composers. And in this instance, the ones that were participating for this exhibition was Angélica Negron. Angélica Negron is a Puerto Rican composer and musician. She is widely recognized and very known for bringing this sort of very reflective sort of sounds that I felt that could be in dialogue or, were in a way connected to what I was presenting. And I showed her some of the images and some of the ideas of the show. And she completely about like sound compositions and how could this be connected into this, and that's how we arrive into it. Also, the other soundscape that you will see, another composer that was participating with me was Damian Quiñones. Damian Quiñones is also, as well as Angelica, they're both composers, musicians, and educators as well. So they knew the perspective of what I was bringing with this exhibition when we did the proposal and when I talked to them at the beginning, and they knew what was the underlining of all of this, which is very important. That's why I like collaboration with peers that have sort of this like-minded or that understand the clear idea of what you're presenting is important. But also in terms of the preparation and the production of the show, there has been other people that have been involved in the 3 iterations of the work. So I have Eric Sanchez, who actually worked also installing some of the parts, Juan Felipe Paredes. I have Yomari Rodriguez that like work with some of the text and the text that was presented on the exhibition. I have Cecilia San Yalbok, who was actually director of G Gallery, who was on board with the project from the very beginning. Maria Rodriguez that like helped me with the process of editing and copywriting of all the text that you're gonna see through the exhibition, and even clicking to some of these creatures. There's a drop menu or sort of drop box in there with text that is written. She helped me to figure it out how these ideas were coming across clear in a clear way. Luis Rivera Sanchez, also fellow artist from Puerto Rico, who also participated in the creation of this entire mural in the space in Lobi in Puerto Rico. And at the end, there's many people that have been involved into the process, and please forgive me if I lack of mentioning of all of them, including the curator Diane Bras Feliciano, who was also like very on board with the project from the very beginning and kind of like seeing the entire project as it was in the process of making. So yeah.
Yeah, I love hearing that. You know, you also talked about working with some people who were also educators, which made me think it might be interesting to hear more about sort of that side of your life. So you're, you know, working on these exhibitions, which are, it feels very consuming, like they're, you know, these really big ideas, and you're working with this whole team, kind of directing this team to bring these ideas to life. And at the same time, you're teaching. So what does that look like for you? Like, where were you teaching? What's your sort of teaching situation now? And what has it been as you've been working through this series of exhibits?
Yeah, so my teaching situation, thank you for asking me this question, because I feel that often for people it's obscure, because teaching is something that I feel that is very subjective, and it depends on the person and depends on the circumstances of each individual. But for me, my teaching situation is that I specifically work with a small program in New York City that is supported by the state and by the city, and also in part by different nonprofit organizations. And we have a team of people. We work with young adults, immigrant young adults. So we work with people from different backgrounds, from different countries, people with different circumstances, such as from dreamers to people that are recently immigrants in the city, undocumented, with a diverse type of backgrounds, but with a rich artistry, as I call it. And those, I work with them developing different strategies of not only like art and aesthetic appreciation, but also reinforcing academics, reinforcing literacy, and learning English at the end of the day too, through the arts. And all of that happened through a process of collaboration that I do with different educators in different content and core areas to be able to prepare those young adults in a period of like 3 to 4 years so they can do a transition into college in the United States. Mm-hmm. And again, I reiterate that they're young adults because some of them they range from the age of like 17 to 21. And we prepare them at that stage because some of them might not have documents because they might have lost them due to different circumstances. And we do different process of assessments to see where they are and where is their areas of interest and how can they be able to re-enter this higher education environment, knowing what they will expect and sort of prepared, not only like academically, but also socially, emotionally, and being able to have the support that they will need. And I arrive into working in this environment precisely through an artwork that I was doing at the time, and my interest with having a diverse type of voices and participation and bringing sort of these ideas that immigrants hold, right, where they compare sort of like their landscape and where they come from to where they arrive now. And that's how I actually arrived working with this community. And it was originally a connection that I found through a nonprofit organization that was able to find this partnership. And from there, I sort of developed something that was more prolonged. And I feel like I'm part of a community precisely like after my research and my desires to be able to bring these diverse voices. So a day for me will look like sort of a full time, like I will say like to 4 or 8 to 6, where I actually like develop different strategies. I work through like not only teaching but counseling and building a community of young adults that they could be able to not only be friends but support each other with these different academic challenges that we present them, and to be able to assimilate living in a bigger city, in a city like New York, and understand art and understand like sort of their background, recognize where they come from and how can they be able to be more empowered, talking about their culture, talking about their artistry at large. So that is what I do. In terms of more recently, I have developed curriculum that connects with different subject areas such as the sciences at large, mathematics, English language arts, and sort of global studies, and seeing how like a case study through the arts can expand into all of these different areas. And one of my recent curriculums look specifically at these ideas of like sustainability and living environments, and how artists have presented different perspectives towards that, from like the perspective of care, maintenance, and having artworks that expand into the natural environment. And we look at the works of different artists like Merle Leatherman Euclides to artists like Andy Goldsworthy, and how they have developed a lexicon through their process of like their art making in connection with the natural environment, not only from a perspective of art and aesthetic appreciation, but just about care. And that has been something that have been sort of happening recently with me.
Amazing. Well, I love how that it sounds like that curriculum development ties right into your own artwork and gives you this chance to explore. I'm thinking two things. Like one is sort of the history and sort of other artists working in similar topics, similar sort of themes that you're interested in as an artist, but then also how to talk about those topics and themes with a young audience, with an audience that might not be super well versed in art and the art world. So being able to do that as sort of like, this is my day job. I feel like that's just really, really valuable.
No, and also it's very beautiful to understand that they come with different perspectives based on their circumstances. And there's, for some of them, right, like art might be because of previous exposure. Art for them might be just like drawing or just painting. And right now we're living in a moment where art is such an expanded field that have multiple practices. And that's why I teach in a way like study cases, right, that are very thematic, very specific. With this one, I noticed that there's different ways that, like, based on their reciprocity about like what I was presenting, is that there's different countries that manage their sustainable practices and their environmental and natural practices within communities and society in very different ways. And there was moments where we did like sort of debates across or even between each other about like, what are actually best practices of care with the environment, and what is those scenarios of futures, right? If we can continue with this extreme consumption, with this idea of, for example, like landfills that are just completely filled, like what is going to be the foreseen future, and how those spaces are managed in different countries, right, in comparison with in here, and what will be the future for that. And I think it is important for me to bring that through art and through this sort of debates that we're doing and analysis and everything, because they are our future, right? Like young people are going to be managing the world pretty soon. And then if they don't have an awareness about this, what is going to happen, right? And we all believe like, well, with the management of disposals and talking about landfills and talking about sustainability and a sustainable environment, everyone thinks that, well, I'm doing my part because I'm recycling, but yet recycling is like one aspect of so many other things. And I think that's why I'm mentioning also the work of Merle Leatherman Euclides, because like since 1970, she was presenting all of this concern through this residency that she did with the sanitation department in New York City. And what does that mean now, right? And what is that going to mean in the future? So bringing this perspective to students that are like newly arriving into New York City, that are part of the city now, like what is their considerations when they not only observe art, when they think about sustainability, when they are encounter with these ideas of recycling and separating their disposals, and what does it mean to go and buy something and dispose it, and having a clarity about that is important. So I feel that as much as it's teaching art, is also teaching about social responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much there. I want to grab onto, you talked about sort of building community and this idea of reciprocity. And really, like, I'm hearing how you value your students' knowledge and you value what they come in with. And I'm wondering if you could maybe share advice, like sort of like tips for other educators, how to do that, how to build that community, how to kind of become this facilitator that shows your students how much you value their existing knowledge.
Yes.
It's not easy.
Right. No, right away when you mentioned this idea of building community, I feel that it has something like this idea of building community and getting into social environments and finding sort of the commonalities among individuals has been something that is sort of innate in me. I come from a family of educators, people that are social workers. So it has been a constant conversation, like in my household and in my environment since I was very young. But also, one of the highlights that I want to mention is that I enriched myself when I did this program with the Laundromat Project, because the Laundromat Project here in New York City is a wonderful organization that in a way prepare artists and give them tools to be able to understand what community means, what are those desires of community members, how they evolve into your work, how like this liaison between nonprofit organizations, grassroots, bigger organizations, sort of community members and community leaders become an extreme support for the development of art. And if one considers itself as an agent of social change and as an artist, you cannot be able to create something and arrive into a place like an alien and just create something and pretend that a community will be able to be in sync with what you're creating, because there's this association, and we're continuing with a practice of colonialism, right? You go into a place and you colonize and you present what you want, and then you rip it off from there and you leave. And that is what has been happening as well, like in the arts. And I felt that the Laundromat Project, I acquire so much tools from their programs and from the moments that we have to be able to exchange with different creators and people who were actually very aware of the social awareness through the arts, with people that are like extremely versed in these fields. And I actually have to mention them because they know how to be able to prepare people in those instances. And they, in a way, through this program and this year-long fellowship that I had with them, I acquire a lot of vocabulary and being able to express myself appropriately with what I think about community, right? And what I think about this idea of building community. That was innate, but I wasn't so eloquent, I will say, about it. Also, I feel that experience is very important, and working in a classroom environment and working within a school community, it is something that, and being in so much in connection with this is something that you start seeing sort of the commonality and the interests and the needs of people, and sort of making them be part of those conversations. And sometimes it's not so much about like what I ask them to do, is about creating a scenario where it's safe for them to be able to find those commonalities. And then that is the point where I am. It's just facilitating those safe spaces for them to be able to say like, hey, yeah, I share that same idea, I have that same perspective, I have lived through the same situation, I crossed the border as you did, right? Like I'm learning a new language as you're doing. Like I thought that this might not be art, but yes, it is. Like, I should not feel ashamed about like, wearing a hijab, or, not being able to speak clearly because, my native language is Spanish, or it's Arabic, or it's Bengali, right? But we are here and we're sharing this space. And as much as I want to learn, I want to share with you. Yeah. And the moments that I get to see that and seeing develop in through the lifetime of like, and years right after that, and seeing that they build a stronger community is something that moves me. Of course, this is not something that I can do by myself. I think being able to have a team of people that are experts, I'm not a social worker, but having people that are knowledgeable about like social work around me is very important. People that are also educators who have like a vast experience, it's important, and being able to share those experiences with them is key. Yeah, one cannot take an entire task like this by themselves and put it in a, in one's back. Like it's impossible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it takes time to build that trust, to build that sort of safe scenario.
Yeah, building that trust and building that environment is something that has to come from the heart. Like you cannot do that. And I'm saying this to all of our listeners and people that are interested in working with community and creating some of this incredible ideas. This is something that has to be constant. There has been something that needs to be a motivation that you have and that you will always find a new way. Like I will tell you that I have been frustrated at times. There's moments that I just don't want to be able to go into those environments again. There's moments where I say that I fall in love again. And, this ebbs and flow. We're humans as well. And we're receptive to this spaces. So it's something that change over time. And you have to be strong and you have to be have a motivation that it's always driving you to this environment. Yeah, because working with people is not easy, but it's not impossible.
Yep. Yeah. And then there's so many things that go into teaching. There's dealing with all of the sort of bureaucracy and all of the lack of funding, especially in the arts, in arts education. And then I'm guessing almost like doubly so when you're sort of working through the arts in these, like, I feel like there needs to be some trauma informed education there. There's like a group of specialists, social workers, therapists, like people that are all kind of working together. But I'm sure there's funding issues constantly. And then working with many different schools and many different sort of stakeholders, that's this other layer of potential frustration and potential joy. Like maybe there's both of those in there.
Yeah, or even potential imagination, I will say, because one of the things that I have noticed too is that, yes, there is also like a lack of funding. Like the arts are not, for some people, it's not seen as something important, right? And there's always the weight of like, what will be, like, what is important for a young person to be able to know to prepare in the future? And people think about all sorts of things and leave kind of like this part of the creativity and the creative imagination as a hobby or as a sidetrack of something. And what we have known in the field of professionals that are coming out into the world right now is that creativity, imagination, resilience is an important quality. It's a key quality that we are hoping people in the future will be prepared with, right? And it's something that is as important as learning other core areas and learning, sort of very logical sort of material. And that is something that the arts can bring, but it's always something that is overlooked because people always think about art or the creative and the imaginative practices as something as a niche, right? It's like, oh, it's drawing or it's painting or it's this or it's that. And, perhaps it's not just those things, but it's something wider than that. And it's something bigger than that as our imagination, as our mind is. And yeah, being able to connect those areas and to think about that is important. And even thinking about funding in a very imaginative way is key. And that is something, again, and I want to mention the laundromat project again. We had an entire session where we talk about, well, like this idea of a scarcity and abundance is something that lies within our brain and within our mind. Like one can have like, $1 million, $50,000, $10,000 to be able to produce an artwork and will do nothing. Or, a person can have just a budget of like $100, $20 or $1 and being able, like in terms of material things and being able to make wonderful things. So just is about how you're able to think about those instances and being able to bring strategies that will take that further.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that makes me think again of, you mentioned the artist Mira Latterman-Ukeles and her almost like performance project. And, I know she was connected with the sanitation department, but was that, a huge, big budget artwork? I don't think so. And the impact of that is just incredible. And it's like you're saying, this sort of imagination, like, why would an artist work with the sanitation department? What does, like, where do those have nothing to do with each other, right? And then, she like thought beyond that. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's thinking about with the frame of mind of imagination. And I think that is what it takes things into the next level. Yeah. Of course, there's also very practical things because if I tell you this, I'm also gonna tell you another thing. Like there's practical things where you need to pay people to be able to like work with you. You need to be able to pay for services and things need to be made. But the moment that you start thinking about those specific problems and start thinking around them and how to be able to create those moments of exchange, which is at the core of it, what is needed, that is what we want people to be able to build themselves with, right?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And that also connects to this idea of teaching and creating those communities that you're building a community of students, but you're also in your art practice building this community of collaborators, building this sort of community of viewers and participants. So there's like all these different levels of community happening in your work. I think that's really beautiful.
Right. And it's not like a clear sort of like recipe of how this happens because I mean, communities can be so diverse as just like obligatory sort of tasks that they have to do, or some of them happen just by pure like randomness, as I will call it. But yeah, understanding that we all live in sort of a community and that sense that you have others around you is important. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm curious a little bit of like sort of the nitty gritty of being an artist. I always like to get and share advice from someone like, other artists might look at you and be like, wow, he's done all these amazing projects. He's shown in Brazil, in Ecuador, in Puerto Rico, in New York, like all these, you've got a lot going on in your art career. Do you have any sort of tips for artists along those lines? Like, how do you sort of get opportunities? How are you navigating the art career and that aspect of being an artist, being able to show your work, being able to potentially sell your work? Like, how does that all work for you?
Wow, there's a lot of
That's a
things in
lot, yeah.
here, but yeah, I mean, one of the things is having some clear goals. Like I have some goals that I sort of outline for myself, like yearly and sort of like from now on, and where are the appropriate places who will be able to champion what I'm presenting. And one has to be clear about that. I think like artists always one kind of like the big show, the this, the that, the museum, this and that, or sell the artworks, millions of dollars. But it's like, how are you clear and how are you like sort of sharing the same mission or the same like perspective and the same views that these places that you want to reach have, right? And if you're in dialogue with them, I prefer that the people that I like work with and the institutions that I work with have some sort of shared mission and vision about like what I'm doing, and that is extremely important. And thinking about like what can I do with what I have and where can I expand, and being clear and also being realistic about that is important. Also, one thing that I see that artists always lack is being able to be sensitive and to be able to share and to be able to build a community within themselves. Museums, institutions, like curators, they all talk to each other. They all know what each other are doing. They all support each other. Yet artists, the first thought is about like withholding everything that they have and not being able to share those resources, not being able to like be thankful about what they have. And that is something that I will share as a recommendation or as a thing, right? It's like, how much are you being able to enrich your immediate environment with others? Yes, and that is what it takes you from one place to another. We live in a social world, and art is so much connected to a social environment that if you are not aware of those social skills that you have and how you're able to share with others, you're limiting your career to be able to develop.
Yeah, I hear the analogy of like the pie or whatever, that there's only so much and like I need my slice so nobody else can have it. If someone else takes it, then there's less for me. But kind of getting past that mindset, like
Exactly.
realizing that, yeah, life isn't a pie.
Right.
But,
And
yeah.
thinking about that, at the end of the day, like art making and the process of like the creative process is one has a perspective about things, right? And it's presenting a perspective, and you have like, you have to find those peers and those that actually like share that same perspective.
Mm.
because a lot of people is like, well, who the one that is going to make my career great is the star curator. But if that curator is not
Mm.
on the same page as you are and is not concerned about the same things that you are, right, is not going to get anywhere. One of the things that I feel that artists are working a lot right now is this issues of identity.
Mm-hmm.
And if one talks about identity and it's something very personal, it's something bringing out, right, like who you are in the world and those modes of representation, if that person on the other side doesn't feel that identity is something important, you're not going to be able to come across. And this is one aspect of those many conversations that are currently happening in contemporary art, right? And that's where disassociation happens, right, with issues of
Mm.
like issues of race, issues of orientation, issues of like, perspective about like post-colonial sort of trauma and everything. It's like if a curator on the other side, or if an institution on the other side don't truly believe in what you're presenting, you're not, you're not going to be, you can't force someone to be able to be in that same space if they
Mm-hmm.
can be able to understand what you're presenting. Yet it's not the end of it, because there's always people that are along with you and that understand that as well. So yeah, that's
Mm.
why I mentioned that it's something very social. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that idea of really finding and seeking out those people, whether it's, fellow artists, curators, institutions, like all of those people in the world that connect with you and connect with your ideas and what you're doing. It's really good advice. Also
Absolutely.
tricky, I think. like like
Yes.
how do you
Yes.
how do you
Yes.
find them? What do you
Yeah, I think reading a lot is very important. Seeing like
Mm.
people's activity, hearing from references, like, someone mentioned a reference to someone that like might be interested in what I'm creating. I take a note on that and I start exploring that person and what that person have done and what is their perspective. And
Mm.
we do an approach like, why not? There's people that are more receptive to approaches and others are not. There's people that like
Mm-hmm.
read you and understand you and are on the same page, even intellectually and conceptually, and like will be able to jump on board. There's people that not. And we understand that we live in a very diverse world with people with different opinions and different perspective about life. That's the
Yeah.
beauty of it.
Yeah, I love that too. Just, like maybe you hear this person might be interested in what you're doing. You kind of look them up and then you reach out, and knowing that I'm going to reach out and I'm putting myself out there and we'll see what happens. This person may or may not be receptive to it. Or it might be one of those situations where it's a curator, they're super busy right now. They get back to you 6 months, a year later, and they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, I did get your message and I did look into you. I just haven't reached out again until now. So it's a long game.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then kind of wrapping up, I love also to hear, and I guess you kind of talked about this, just what sort of a day in the life or a week in the life looks like. You said you're teaching, or you would be teaching, almost full time, and then are you making work in the evenings, on the weekends, and then even like all the travel for your artwork? How does it all fit in?
How does that fit in? I think it all happens simultaneously. I think one of the things that is very handy for me is having a very clear agenda and a very clear calendar about like when things are going to happen. I
Mm-hmm.
plan some things like 6 months to a year in advance, and some others like happen on a weekly basis. For
Mm-hmm.
me, yes, I have a full-time like, commitment already with like my teaching practice and also my counseling practice and everything, and that is part of it. But that doesn't prevent me for being able to create my work, because there's a lot of intellectual conversations that happen in there that feeds into the process of researching. So it is important to also know that like it's not like there's a day job and then I clocked out and then something else starts. It's just that everything
Right.
happens simultaneously, and I want to keep it in that way. And I have worked really hard to be able to get into that point, and I want it to remain like that. The moment that you see this divisions and partisan and like, being able to feel frustrated about one thing and then excited about the other, it's like when things are not working and you need to find another north, I feel.
Mm.
Yeah, so a day for me will look like that. I wake up usually like 5 6 o'clock in the morning. I drink coffee as everybody else, I guess, I suppose. um Yes, and I'm a very flexible person, so like I could be right now here in New York, I can be next week in Puerto Rico, and like I will find a place and I will find kind of like my track of my sort of lifestyle or how it happened last year that I was living in Ecuador in Quito. Of course, I planned, everything around to be able to be supported. It's not like I'm gonna be randomly like staying in any place, but just planning all of those things in advance is very important.
Mhm.
Yes, a day for me looks very structured. I put timings between things. Checking my emails is very important. Keeping track some sort of what's happening in social media and having a social media plan is something that I also rely on using. And I'm not a person that is sort of sporadic sharer with like social media. Like I have a plan of when and what I want to do. Like as time
Mm.
progresses. Some things are more clear than others because depend on institutions and on people and on requests and all of that. But yeah, that's how I do it. Yeah. I think
That's
life has changed for me recently in the past like 2, 3 years because I used to participate at more events, going to more like physical opening receptions, going to galas, going out to dinners, sharing with artists, visiting studios, and that has sort of slowed down very radically,
Mm.
just because I have been moving into different places, but also because of the health crisis and the concerns that we have right now in
Mhm.
our reality. So yeah, that's how it looks like.
Yeah. It's always interesting to hear how it all fits in. And I love hearing how this sort of seamless quote unquote day job and your art career, like it's not two separate things. They're sort of seamlessly interwoven. And that's really beautiful, I think, for other artist educators to hear that, you can kind of mesh these two in some ways.
Yes.
Getting into a fun question I like to ask everybody, what are you curious about? Really broad question.
What am I curious about? And what am I thinking about right now? I am thinking about many things. I
Yep.
am thinking about how and what I'm going to present in New York City because on June of 2022, I will be participating in a group exhibition at the Elizabeth Foundation, as part
Mm.
of a residency project that started now. And kind of like imagining what will be those possible scenarios and what is going to happen in there. Yeah, so that is something that has me sort of curious and wondering about. Yeah.
Mm.
And yeah, that is where I am right now.
That's great. Yeah. And I love the little like, okay, we know something's coming up in June. Keep your eyes out.
Yes, and for all of our listeners, please you can find me on social media, follow, talk, or comment on some things, and we can always expand from there. I'm also curious about even how like to be able to engage with a wider audience in TikTok, for example. Like that is
Mm.
something that has me thinking about that. Yeah. And my
Yeah.
students are making me think about it too.
Yep. I know there's nothing like working with young people to kind of force you to be like up to date on technology.
Yes, absolutely.
And what are your links? How can people find you?
Yes, so people can find me with my first name and last name, so Lionel Cruet, or El Cruet. And
Mhm.
then yes, you can go into all different social medias, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, LinkedIn. With the
All
majority
of
of
it.
them, you can find me with my first name and last name. Yeah.
Awesome. And I will link to that as well. Okay, I have a fun question I like to ask everybody as well. What is your favorite food?
My favorite food, wow. This is really hard because
Oh.
I have shared with so many people and so many delicious things that it's hard for me to pinpoint like on something specific. Wow. But I feel like some of the food and some of the cuisine that is actually from the Caribbean where I'm from, like are actually really exciting. There's a lot of like rice, beans, and very particular things that happen in the Caribbean that I'm always like gravitating towards. And I think it's just
Mm.
because it is my background and yeah, it
Yeah, I
is
love that.
something that I like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like going back home. But it's great. You can get so much of that amazing food in New York.
Yes, yes, yes. And thinking even about like what will be the future of that too. Thinking about like how are we changing in terms of our diets and what we eat as society, and thinking about maybe like more of a meatless sort of diet, and what will that become when we have like traditions and customs on the line. So that's why I feel
Yeah.
that that is an interesting favorite food, or yeah.
Yeah, it's a loaded question, right?
Yes.
Oh. And then I know you've mentioned a lot of people that have worked with you and helped you through your work. I always like to leave room to just give a thank you or a shout out to anyone in particular that's really been like a supporter.
Yes, for specifically about this, the last part of like the online iteration of Rhetorics of an Uncertain Future with Play Inspire. I have some acknowledgements, and I want to be able to thank Diane Bras Feliciano, who's the curator of the show, Maria Rodriguez for the entire editing and the editorial process through the development of the work. Donald Escudero Rivera for coordinating the exhibition from the beginning to the end and noticing all of the details on it. Also, in terms of the animations, to Daniel Capote and Héctor Cruet. For the soundscape of Angelica, I want to thank Angelica Negron for being able to share her perspective through this sort of oral experience and being so open with me from the very beginning with these ideas of collaboration, someone that is so busy, and everyone in here. And also especially to Play Inspire, you, Rebecca, for giving me this opportunity and for opening these channels of conversation, and to Maria Coit-Crisol. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we are so excited to have it there. Everybody needs to go check it out. Go look at Lionel's work. Look at the show that's up now on the website, but also keep an eye out for more coming. Thank you so much for this conversation. This was really great.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can reach me at Teaching Artist Podcast on Instagram or teachingartistpodcast@gmail.com. Who do you want to hear from? Please share your recommendations of teaching artists. And if you loved this episode, please subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow me. It really makes a big difference. Thank you.